My parents sold my 11-year-old daughter's antique cello for $87,000 and spent the money on a pool for my sister's kids. When Grandma found out, she didn't cry. She smiled and said the cello was never just a cello. My parents' faces went pale. I'm Julia Mickles, and I should probably start by saying that money doesn't solve problems. It just makes them more expensive. My family proved that theory every single day in our sprawling Boston neighborhood where the lawns were perfect and the secrets were buried deep. The kind of place where everyone drove luxury cars, but nobody actually talked to each other. Unless it was to compare vacation homes or brag about their kids getting into Yale. I'd grown up in this world, married into more of it, and honestly thought I'd escape the worst of it by keeping my distance from my parents and my sister Carolyn. Turns out distance means nothing when people decide they're entitled to what's yours. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was in my home office going over contracts for my interior design firm when my phone lit up with my mother's number. I almost didn't answer. These days, conversations with Barbara Ashford usually involved either criticism of my parenting or some request disguised as concern. But something made me pick up. Maybe instinct, maybe just bad timing. "Julia, darling, we need to talk about something," my mother said in that voice she used when she was about to justify something terrible. You know the tone, sweet as honey but with steel underneath. "What is it, Mom?" I kept my eyes on my laptop screen, already bracing myself. "Well, Caroline's been having such a difficult time, with the kids and the new house and everything. And we wanted to do something special for them. The children have been begging for a pool, and it would be so wonderful for their development. Swimming is such excellent exercise, and we thought, Mom, what did you do?" My hand tightened around the phone. There was a pause. My father's voice rumbled in the background, and then my mother continued, faster now. "We sold that old cello that was just sitting in Emma's room gathering dust. Honestly, Julia, she hasn't touched it in months, and it was taking up so much space. We got an excellent price, $87,000. Can you imagine? For an instrument that was just collecting cobwebs. The pool company is coming next week, and Caroline is just thrilled. The children are so excited. I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "You did what?" Now, don't take that tone with me, young lady. We're her grandparents. We have every right to make decisions about items that are essentially family heirlooms. Your grandmother gave that cello to the family, not specifically to Emma. And Caroline's children are family too. You've always been so selfish about these things, Julia. Everything doesn't revolve around you and your daughter. My vision actually blurred for a second. That cello had been in Emma's room since my grandmother handed it to her on her 7th birthday. Tears streaming down the old woman's weathered face as she pressed it into Emma's small hands. This belonged to someone very special. Grandma had whispered, "Take care of it, sweet girl. It's more valuable than you know." Emma had started lessons immediately, practiced every single day. And 4 years later, she was performing at youth orchestras and talking about music school. That cello wasn't gathering dust. It was her entire world. "Mom, that cello was Emma's. Grandma gave it to her specifically. You had no right. We had every right. It was in our home, and we made a decision that benefits the entire family. Caroline's children deserve nice things too, Julia. You've always acted like Emma is the only grandchild that matters. This is about fairness." I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach through the phone and shake her until some sense fell into her entitled brain. But I'd learned a long time ago that losing your temper with Barbara Ashford only gave her ammunition. Instead, I took a breath and said in the coldest voice I could manage, "Where's the cello now?" "Sold to a private collector in New York. The transaction is complete." "Julia, the money's already been transferred to the pool company as a deposit. Now, I really think you should focus on the positive here. This pool is going to bring so much joy too." I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down on my desk before I threw it. $87,000. They'd sold my daughter's most prized possession, an instrument my grandmother had entrusted to her. and used the money to build a pool for my sister's 3 spoiled kids who already had everything. I thought about Emma coming home from school, running to her room and finding the empty stand where her cello had been. I thought about the look on her face, the betrayal, the confusion. I grabbed my keys and my phone and headed for the door. My grandmother lived 20 minutes away in an assisted living facility that looked more like a 5-star hotel than a nursing home. If anyone would understand the enormity of what my parents had just done, it would be her. Grandma Vivian had always been the one person in this family who saw through the polished surface to the rot underneath. She'd know what to do. The drive felt endless, even though I was probably speeding. I kept replaying my mother's words. Family heirlooms, fairness. As if Carolyn and her husband hadn't just bought a 6,000 square foot house in Wellesley. As if their kids didn't already have every toy and gadget and experience money could buy. As if Emma didn't deserve to keep the one thing that mattered to her more than anything else. My sister had always been the favorite, always gotten everything she wanted, and my parents had always made excuses for her. But this was different. This wasn't about favoritism or jealousy or sibling rivalry. This was theft. I parked in the visitor lot and practically ran through the elegant lobby to the elevator. Grandma's apartment was on the 3rd floor, corner unit with views of the garden. I knocked twice and then used my key when she didn't answer right away. She was in her sitting room, a book open on her lap, classical music playing softly from her speaker. At 86, Vivian Ashford was still sharp as a blade and twice as elegant. She looked up when I came in, and her expression shifted immediately. "Julia, what's happened?" I told her everything. The words tumbled out in a rush, anger and disbelief mixing together until I wasn't sure if I was making sense. But Grandma just listened, her pale blue eyes never leaving my face. When I finally ran out of steam, she set her book aside carefully and folded her hands in her lap. "They sold Emma's cello," she said slowly, "for a pool. It's $87,000. For Caroline's kids, like Emma doesn't even matter." Grandma was quiet for a long moment. Then, to my complete shock, she smiled. Not a sad smile or a bitter smile, but something almost satisfied. Something that looked eerily like triumph. "Good," she said softly. I stared at her. "Grandma, did you hear what I said?" "They sold, I heard you perfectly, darling." And I said good, because now we can finally move forward. She stood up with the careful grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime carrying herself like royalty and walked to her desk. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a manila folder stuffed with papers and handed it to me. "Sit down, Julia. There are some things you need to know about that cello. Things I've been waiting to tell you for a very long time." My heart was pounding as I took the folder. "What things?" "The cello was never just a cello," Grandma said, settling back into her chair. "It was a test. And your parents just failed it spectacularly." I opened the folder. Inside were documents, old photographs, letters written in faded ink, and what looked like legal paperwork. My eyes caught on a name at the top of one letter, and my breath stopped. "Grandma, is this yes? Now let me tell you a story about your grandfather. Your parents, and exactly how much they don't know about the family they claim to understand so well." Her smile widened, and I realized with a chill that I'd never actually seen this side of my grandmother before. The side that planned. The side that waited. The side that knew exactly how to deliver justice. That cello belonged to someone your parents have spent 30 years trying to erase from family history. And by selling it, they've just handed us everything we need. I looked down at the documents again, my mind racing. There were property deeds, stock certificates, account numbers, and a last will and testament dated 5 years ago. Everything was notarized, official, legal. And every single document had my grandmother's signature next to one name I'd heard maybe twice in my entire life. Always in whispers, always with my parents quickly changing the subject. "Who was he, Grandma?" I asked, even though I was starting to piece it together. "Your grandfather had a brother," she said quietly. "Samuel. Your parents pretended he didn't exist because Samuel called them out on every lie, every manipulation, every selfish thing they ever did. He was a classical musician, a cellist, and he was the only person in this family who ever stood up to your father. When Samuel died 15 years ago, he left his entire estate to me, including that cello and instructions for exactly what I should do with it. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. He wanted to make sure that the truth came out eventually. And he wanted to make sure that when it did, the right people benefited. What truth? My voice came out as barely a whisper. That your parents have been lying about money for decades. That the wealth they've been throwing around and holding over everyone's heads isn't actually theirs. And that by selling Samuel's cello without permission, they've just triggered a clause in his will that strips them of access to everything. Grandma's smile was razor sharp now. The cello was the test. Julia, if they could resist their own greed and entitlement long enough to respect what it meant to Emma, then they would have proven they'd changed. But they couldn't resist, could they? They saw dollar signs and your sister's demands. And they did exactly what Samuel predicted they'd do. I looked down at the papers in my hands, at the numbers that didn't make sense, at the legal language that seemed to rearrange my entire understanding of my family. How much money are we talking about? $7.3 million in stocks, bonds, and real estate, Grandma said calmly. All of it held in a trust that your parents have been accessing for years, believing it was their inheritance from Samuel. But it wasn't. It was his insurance policy. And the moment the cello was sold without the consent of its designated owner, every penny of it reverts to me, to be distributed how I see fit. Samuel made sure of it. He knew exactly what kind of people your parents were. Okay, my head was spinning. $7 million. My parents had been living off money that wasn't actually theirs, acting like they were the successful ones, the wealthy ones. It's the ones who got to make all the decisions. And it had all been a lie. There's more, Grandma said, and her voice had an edge to it now. Your sister Caroline knew. She's known for 2 years that selling anything from Samuel's collection would trigger the clause. Your mother told her during one of their shopping trips, thinking Caroline would help protect the assets. But your sister didn't care. She wanted that pool more than she wanted to protect the family money. She pushed your parents to sell the cello, told them it didn't matter, that rules were made to be broken. She gambled and lost. I thought about my sister, about the way she'd always gotten everything she wanted, about how my parents had always defended her even when she was clearly in the wrong. And now she'd convinced them to destroy their own financial security just so her kids could have a pool. The irony was almost beautiful. What happens now? I asked. Grandma pulled another document from her desk and handed it to me. It was a letter, handwritten in her precise script, addressed to my parents' attorney. Now I execute Samuel's wishes. The trust reverts to me immediately. Your parents will be notified within 48 hours that their access is terminated. And then I'm going to do exactly what Samuel wanted me to do with that money. I'm going to make sure it goes to the people in this family who actually deserve it. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman who'd raised my father and then watched him turn into someone she barely recognized. I saw the hurt and the disappointment and the years of hoping he'd change. And I saw the resolution in her eyes now that hope was gone. He really thought they'd fail the test, didn't he? I said. Samuel, he knew they would, Grandma corrected. That's why he set it up this way. He wanted to give them a chance, but he also wanted to make sure that when they showed their true colors, there would be consequences. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Emma's going to get her cello back. Julia, I've already contacted the buyer. He's a friend of Samuel's estate attorney, and he was instructed to hold the instrument for exactly this scenario. The sale will be reversed, and Emma's going to get a lot more than just her cello back. I felt tears sting my eyes for the first time since that phone call from my mother. Thank you, Grandma. Don't thank me yet. There's still work to do. Your parents are going to fight this. Caroline is going to lose her mind when she realizes that pool is never getting built. And we need to make sure every single detail is handled correctly so they can't worm their way out of the consequences. She stood up, suddenly looking 10 years younger. But we're going to win, Julia, because for once, the people who've been playing games with other people's lives are going to lose. and they're going to lose everything. I drove home in a daze, the folder of documents sitting on my passenger seat like a bomb waiting to go off. Emma wasn't home yet, still at school for orchestra practice, which gave me time to process what I'd learned. My parents had been living off my great-uncle's money for years, acting like they were generous benefactors, when really they were just trustees of wealth that was never meant to be theirs to control. Samuel had seen through them decades ago and had set up the perfect trap. All he'd needed was for them to be exactly who they were, greedy and entitled and utterly convinced of their own righteousness. And they'd walked right into it. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Julia, I really think you're overreacting about the cello situation. Let's have lunch next week and discuss this like adults." I deleted it without responding. There was nothing to discuss. The consequences were already in motion, ticking down like a clock that couldn't be stopped. When Emma came home an hour later, her face lit up the way it always did when she saw me. 11 years old and already so talented, so dedicated, so much better than any of us deserved. She dumped her backpack by the door and headed for the kitchen. "Mom, can I practice before dinner? Mrs. Chen said I'm ready to try the Dvorak concerto, and I want to get started." I thought about the empty stand in her room that she hadn't discovered yet. I thought about my parents' faces when they realized what they'd done. And I thought about the justice that was coming, swift and absolute. "Actually, sweetie, come sit with me for a minute. There's something we need to talk about." Emma's smile faded. She could read my tone, could tell something was wrong. She sat down next to me on the couch, her dark eyes searching my face. "What happened?" I took a breath and told her everything. About my parents selling her cello without permission. About the money they'd spent on Caroline's pool. About how wrong it was and how hurt I knew she must feel. I watched her face crumble, watched the tears start to fall, and felt my own anger crystallize into something cold and determined. No child should have to feel this betrayed by her own family. But why? Emma's voice broke. Didn't they know how much it meant to me? Didn't they care? Sometimes people get so caught up in what they want that they forget about anyone else. I said carefully, "But here's the thing, baby. Great-uncle Samuel, the man who originally owned that cello, he was a very smart person. And he knew that something like this might happen someday. So he made plans. And Grandma Vivian has been working behind the scenes to make sure that when it did happen, you'd get your cello back. And that the people who hurt you would face real consequences." Emma wiped her eyes. "Really? I'm going to get it back." "You're going to get it back. I promise. And a lot more than that." I pulled her close, feeling her shake with residual tears. Great-uncle Samuel left instructions that if anyone in the family sold his cello without the owner's permission, they would lose access to all his money, all $7 million of it. And guess who's been using that money to fund their lifestyle for the past 15 years? Emma's eyes went wide. Grandma Barbara and Grandpa Richard. Exactly. And Aunt Carolyn knew selling the cello would trigger consequences, but she convinced them to do it anyway because she wanted a pool for her kids. I saw understanding dawn in Emma's face. So now they're going to lose everything. The money, the power, the ability to act like they're better than everyone else. All of it. For a long moment, Emma was quiet. Then she said in a voice that sounded much older than 11, "Good. They should lose everything. They didn't just take my cello, Mom. They took the thing Great-Grandma Vivian trusted them to protect for me. They proved they don't care about anyone but themselves." I hugged her tighter. "Grandma's going to make sure you're taken care of, sweetie. All of this, everything Samuel set up, it was designed to protect the people in this family who actually deserved protection. And that's you." That night, after Emma finally went to bed, I sat in my office and went through the documents Grandma had given me again. The trust was ironclad. Samuel had worked with the best attorneys money could buy to make sure that once the trigger clause was activated, there was no way to reverse it. My parents would be notified within 2 days that their access to the accounts was terminated. They'd have 30 days to contest it in court. But the evidence was overwhelming. They'd sold property that didn't belong to them. They'd violated the explicit terms of the trust. And Caroline's involvement, her knowledge of the consequences, and her pushing them to do it anyway, that just made it worse. I found myself thinking about Samuel, this great uncle I'd barely known. A classical musician who'd seen his family's true nature and had decided to do something about it. He could have just cut them off entirely, could have left his money to charity or distant relatives or anyone else. But instead, he'd created a test, a chance for redemption. And when they failed, as he'd known they would, he'd made sure the people who'd been hurt by their selfishness would be protected. My phone rang at almost midnight. My mother. I debated not answering, but something told me this would be entertaining. "Julia, what have you done?" Her voice was shrill, panicked. "I just got a call from our attorney. He says there's some issue with Samuel's trust and that we're being investigated for breach of terms." "Did you do this? Did you and your grandmother conspire too?" "I didn't do anything, Mom," I said calmly. "You sold Emma's cello. You violated the terms of Samuel's trust. And now you're facing the consequences. This has nothing to do with me and everything to do with your own choices. This is ridiculous. That trust money is ours. Samuel left it to your father." "No, Mom. Samuel put that money in trust with specific conditions. Dad's been allowed to access it only as long as he followed the rules. And one of those rules was that nothing from Samuel's collection could be sold without the designated owner's permission. You sold Emma's cello. You broke the contract. And now the trust reverts to Grandma Vivian to distribute as she sees fit." There was a long silence. Then, in a low, dangerous voice, my mother said, "Your grandmother has poisoned you against us. She's always resented your father's success, always been jealous that we built a good life without her help. This is her revenge for some imagined slight from 30 years ago. Actually, this is her following the legal instructions of a dead man who knew exactly what kind of people you were. Samuel set this up, Mom. He's the one who created the test. He's the one who predicted you'd fail it. Grandma's just executing his wishes." I paused. "And, by the way, that pool Caroline wanted? It's never getting built. The deposit's going to be returned to the cello's buyer as restitution for the unauthorized sale. Caroline's kids will just have to make do with the country club pool like every other rich kid in Wellesley." "You vindictive little," she caught herself. "We're going to fight this, Julia. We're going to contest the trust in court. Samuel wasn't in his right mind when he wrote those provisions. We'll prove it. Good luck with that." Samuel worked with 3 different law firms and had multiple psychological evaluations to prove competency. Everything's documented. Everything's legal. And every single thing you've done over the past 24 hours has been recorded. And will be used as evidence that you're exactly the kind of people Samuel thought you were. I felt a smile tug at my lips. "You played yourselves, Mom. You and Dad and Caroline. You saw an opportunity to get what you wanted, and you didn't care who you hurt to get it. And now you're going to pay for it." She hung up on me. I set the phone down and realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. Just pure calm certainty that justice was being served. The next morning, Grandma called. "The attorney filed the paperwork last night. Your parents have been officially notified that the trust is being revoked. Caroline's already called me 3 times screaming about the pool. Your father's threatening to sue. It's going exactly as expected." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait for them to exhaust themselves trying to fight the inevitable. They'll hire lawyers, they'll make threats, they'll try to turn other family members against us. But in the end, the law is clear. They violated the terms. The trust reverts. And Samuel's wishes will be carried out." She paused. "I'm going to make sure Emma's education is fully funded, Julia. Music school, college, whatever she needs. And I'm setting up a trust in your name that they can't touch. Money to make sure you and Emma are secure no matter what happens. That's what Samuel wanted. He wanted to protect the people in this family who actually had integrity. Thank you, Grandma. Don't thank me yet. We're just getting started." There was steel in her voice, the sound of someone who'd waited decades for this moment. Your parents built their entire identity on having money and power and using it to control everyone around them. They're about to learn what it feels like to have none of those things. And they're going to learn it publicly. Because I'm making sure everyone in our social circle knows exactly why they lost access to the trust. No more hiding behind fake success and borrowed wealth. Just the truth, cold and unforgiving. I thought about the women my mother had lunch with every week. The way she name-dropped and showed off and acted like she was the most successful person in the room. I thought about my father's business partners, the way he threw money around to seem important. All of it built on Samuel's money, on wealth that was never truly theirs. And now it was all going to come crashing down. Emma came into my office as I was hanging up with Grandma. She'd been quiet all morning, processing everything. Now she looked at me with those serious dark eyes and said, "Mom, can I ask you something? Anything, sweetie?" Why didn't Grit Uncle Samuel just tell everyone the truth when he was alive? Why did he wait until after he was gone to set all this up? I've thought about that. I think he wanted to give people a chance to change. He didn't want to believe his own family was irredeemable. So he created a test that would reveal the truth eventually, one way or another. If your grandparents had respected the cello, respected you, then maybe there would have been hope. But they didn't. And now the truth is coming out exactly the way Samuel planned. Emma nodded slowly. Then she said something that made me realize how much she'd grown up in the past 24 hours. They're not going to apologize, are they? They're going to blame everyone but themselves. Probably, I admitted. Good, because I don't think I could forgive them even if they did apologize. They didn't just take my cello, Mom. They showed me that I don't matter to them as much as money does. And that's not something you can fix with sorry. I pulled her into a hug, this fierce, brilliant girl who deserved so much better than what she'd gotten from her grandparents. You matter to me, baby. You matter to Great-Grandma Vivian. And you mattered to Great-Uncle Samuel, even though he never got to meet you. That's why he set all this up. He wanted to make sure people like you would be protected from people like them. The rest of that week was chaos. My parents hired an attorney who immediately started making noise about contesting the trust. Caroline called me 6 times, leaving increasingly unhinged voicemails about how I'd ruined her children's lives over a stupid instrument. My father sent a formal letter demanding I convince Grandma to reverse course, threatening to cut me out of the family entirely if I didn't comply. I ignored all of it. Let them rage. Let them threaten. It changed nothing. Grandma's attorney was a shark in expensive suits, a woman named Patricia Donnelly who'd handled Samuel's estate and had been waiting for this moment almost as long as Grandma had. She filed motion after motion, each one more devastating than the last, building an airtight case that my parents had knowingly violated the trust terms. She subpoenaed emails between my mother and Carolyn, proving they'd discussed the consequences before selling the cello. She brought in the original dealer who'd authenticated the cello years ago, who testified that my parents had been explicitly told it was part of Samuel's protected collection. Every single piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. They'd known exactly what they were doing, and they'd done it anyway. 2 weeks after the initial filing, Emma's cello came home. The buyer delivered it personally, a distinguished older man who'd been friends with Samuel and who'd kept the instrument safe specifically for this possibility. He handed it to Emma with tears in his eyes. "Your great-uncle loved this cello," he said quietly. "He wanted to make sure it went to someone who would treasure it the way he did. I think he'd be very happy to know it's yours." Emma took the cello with shaking hands, held it close, and whispered, "Thank you." That night she played for hours, the music drifting through the house like a blessing. I sat in my office listening to her practice the Dvorak concerto she'd mentioned weeks ago, before everything exploded. The notes were clean and sure, confident in a way she hadn't been before. She'd learned something valuable through all this pain. She'd learned that some people will try to take from you simply because they can. And she'd learned that sometimes justice actually comes. 3 weeks after the trust revocation, Patricia filed the final documents. The court date was set for mid-November. My parents' attorney had tried every angle, every loophole, every desperate argument he could think of. But the evidence was overwhelming. The trust was clear, and Samuel had made absolutely certain there was no way to worm out of consequences once the trigger had been activated. The judge would rule in Grandma's favor. It was only a matter of time. I met Grandma for lunch at her favorite restaurant, a quiet place downtown where the wealthy went to be seen but not heard. She looked younger somehow, lighter, like she'd been carrying a weight for decades and finally got to set it down. When the waiter brought our food, she raised her glass of wine and said to Samuel, "And to justice, however long it takes." I clinked my glass against hers. To Samuel. "There's something else I need to tell you," Grandma said as we ate. "Something about why Samuel set all this up the way he did." "What is it?" "Your father wasn't always like this. When he was young, before he married your mother, he was kind, generous. He cared about more than money and status. But Barbara changed him. Or maybe she just brought out what was already there." Samuel watched it happen.
Watched his nephew turn into someone he didn't recognize, and it broke his heart. She set down her fork. Samuel tried to talk to your father about it, tried to warn him that he was becoming someone cruel, but your father wouldn't listen. He chose Barbara, chose the lifestyle, chose to believe that money and power were more important than integrity. So Samuel wrote him out of his personal will and put everything in trust with conditions. This was his last attempt to reach his nephew, to give him a chance to prove he'd changed, and your father failed. "He always does," I said quietly. "Yes, he does." Grandma looked out the window at the city beyond. "But you didn't, and Emma didn't, and that's why Samuel made sure there was a path forward for the people who deserved it. He wanted to make sure that even if his nephew was lost, his nephew's children might still have a chance." I thought about my father, about the man I'd known growing up, who always seemed more interested in appearances than substance. I thought about the times he'd chosen my sister over me, the way he'd dismissed my achievements while celebrating Caroline's mediocrity, the casual cruelty that he'd always explained away as tough love. And I realized Samuel had seen all of it coming. He'd watched a young man transform into someone capable of selling his own granddaughter's most prized possession for a pool, and he'd planned accordingly. "When does the court date happen?" I asked. "November 15th. Patricia says the judge is likely to rule from the bench, meaning your parents will know their fate immediately. No appeals, no delays, just immediate consequences. And after that, I'll begin distributing the funds according to Samuel's wishes and my own judgment." She smiled. "Emma's trust is already set up. Yours will be finalized by the end of the month. And there are a few other surprises I have planned that your parents won't see coming." "Other surprises?" "You'll find out soon enough." The look in her eyes was almost mischievous. "Let's just say that Samuel wasn't the only one who's been planning for this moment. I've had years to think about what real justice looks like, and it's going to be far more comprehensive than your parents can possibly imagine." We finished lunch talking about Emma, about her progress with the cello, about the future that was opening up now that she had the financial security Samuel had intended. Grandma told stories about Samuel, about his life as a musician, about the concerts he'd played and the students he'd mentored. I realized I'd missed out on knowing an extraordinary man because my parents had chosen to erase him from family history. But his legacy lived on in the trust he'd created, in the music Emma played, in the justice that was finally being served. When I got home that afternoon, I found Emma in her room practicing. She stopped when she saw me and said, "Mom, I've been thinking about something." "What's that, sweetie?" "I want to perform at the court hearing. When the judge rules on the trust, I want Grandma Barbara and Grandpa Richard to hear me play on the cello they tried to take away." Her eyes were steady, determined. "I want them to see that they didn't win, that they'll never win, because Great Uncle Samuel made sure of it." I looked at my daughter, this fierce young woman who'd learned hard lessons about family and betrayal and justice, and felt pride surge through me. "I think that's a perfect idea. I'll talk to Patricia about it." Patricia thought it was brilliant. She filed a motion to allow Emma to perform a brief piece before the hearing, as a demonstration of the cello's significance and value. The judge approved it. And so, on November 15th, 2 months after my parents had sold Emma's cello for pool money, we all gathered in a courtroom for the final reckoning. My parents sat on one side with their attorney, looking older and harder than I'd ever seen them. Caroline was there too, her face tight with anger. Grandma and Emma and I sat on the other side with Patricia, calm and ready. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge entered, and before any arguments were heard, before any motions were filed, Emma walked to the center of the courtroom with her cello and began to play. She chose the Dvorak Concerto, the piece she'd been working on when all of this started. The notes filled the courtroom, soaring and aching, and absolutely perfect. I watched my parents' faces as they listened. My father looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere else. But my mother, she stared at Emma with something that might have been regret. Too little, far too late. When Emma finished, the courtroom was silent. Then the judge spoke. "Thank you, young lady, that was extraordinary. Now let's proceed with—" And that's when Patricia stood up and said, "Your Honor, before we begin, there's been a development, one that I believe will resolve this matter swiftly and permanently." Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. "Your Honor, late yesterday evening, I received documentation from Switzerland that changes the nature of this case significantly. With the court's permission, I'd like to present evidence that the trust in question is only one part of a much larger estate that the defendants have been systematically misrepresenting for over a decade." The judge leaned forward. "Proceed." I watched my father's face drain of color. My mother gripped the armrest of her chair so hard her knuckles went white. Caroline looked between them, confusion turning to panic. They had no idea what was coming. Neither did I, honestly. Grandma had mentioned surprises, but I'd assumed she meant the trust distribution. This was something else entirely. Patricia laid out document after document on the defense table, each one stamped and certified by international banks. Samuel Ashford maintained accounts in 3 countries. The $7 million trust that's the subject of today's hearing represents only his domestic holdings. His international assets, totaling an additional $18 million, were kept separate and disclosed only to Mrs. Vivian Ashford and his estate attorney. The defendants were never informed of these accounts because Samuel explicitly stated they were never to benefit from them under any circumstances. My mother shot to her feet. "That's impossible. Samuel's will was read 15 years ago. We saw every asset." "You saw what Samuel wanted you to see," Patricia said calmly. "The international accounts were disclosed separately to Mrs. Ashford in a private reading that occurred 6 months after the public will reading. Everything was legal, properly documented, and designed to protect assets from individuals Samuel deemed untrustworthy." The judge studied the documents. "Ms. Donnelly, what's the relevance to today's proceedings?" "The relevance, Your Honor, is that the defendants have been representing themselves to banks, business partners, and family members as the primary beneficiaries of Samuel Ashford's $25 million estate. They've used this representation to secure loans, lines of credit, and business investments totaling over $3 million. But they never had legitimate claim to the full estate, only to the $7 million domestic trust, and only as long as they followed the conditions. By violating those conditions, they've now lost access to the only portion they ever had legitimate claim to, which means their outstanding debts and obligations are secured by assets they no longer control." I watched understanding dawn on my father's face. He'd leveraged Samuel's money to build his entire business empire, taking out loans and making investments based on wealth he thought was guaranteed, and now that foundation was crumbling. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "Mrs. Caroline Mitchell knowingly encouraged her parents to violate the trust conditions, despite being aware of the consequences. Text messages retrieved from Mrs. Ashford's phone show Mrs. Mitchell saying, and I quote,
Who cares about some dead guy's rules? Sell the cello and get us the pool. They're not going to enforce some stupid clause from 15 years ago. This demonstrates clear intent to defraud the estate and willful disregard for legal contracts. Caroline stood up, her voice shaking. Those texts were private. You can't use those. They were submitted voluntarily by Mrs. Ashford Sr. during discovery. Your mother provided them 3 days ago when we asked for all communications regarding the cello sale. She apparently didn't read them closely enough to realize they implicated you as a co-conspirator. I looked at my mother, who had gone absolutely gray. She'd handed over evidence of Caroline's involvement without realizing it. The golden child, the favorite, was about to go down too. The judge set down the documents and removed his glasses. Mr. Ashford, Mrs. Ashford, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you or did you not use representations of Samuel Ashford's full estate to secure financial instruments and obligations? My father's attorney started to stand, but my father waved him off. For the first time in my life, I saw defeat in Richard Ashford's eyes. We believed the money was ours. Samuel left it in trust for our benefit. We had every right to use it as collateral for investments. Did you inform your creditors that the trust had conditions and could be revoked? The judge pressed. Silence. I'll take that as a no. The judge looked at the paperwork again. Ms. Donnelly, what is Mrs. Vivian Ashford requesting from this court?
Mrs. Ashford requests immediate and permanent revocation of the defendant's access to the $7 million trust, with all assets to revert to her control for distribution according to Samuel Ashford's stated wishes and her own discretion. She also requests that the court note the defendant's fraudulent representations for the benefit of their creditors, who have a right to know the collateral they accepted no longer exists. And the $18 million in international accounts? The judge asked. Already secure and never accessible to the defendants. I'm presenting this information solely to demonstrate the pattern of deception the defendants have engaged in. They've been living off borrowed credibility for over a decade, using Samuel's name and wealth to elevate themselves while violating the very conditions that gave them access in the first place. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm ruling from the bench. The trust is revoked, effective immediately. All assets revert to Vivian Ashford with full authority to distribute as she sees fit. The defendants are ordered to provide full accounting of any debts or obligations secured using the trust as collateral within 30 days. This court finds that the defendants willfully violated clearly stated conditions and did so with knowledge of the consequences, as evidenced by the text messages between Mrs. Barbara Ashford and Mrs. Caroline Mitchell. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the appropriate authorities for investigation of potential fraud, as the defendants appear to have made material misrepresentations to financial institutions. He looked directly at my parents. You gambled with someone else's generosity and lost. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down like thunder. My mother burst into tears. My father sat frozen, staring at nothing. Caroline grabbed her purse and ran from the courtroom, unable to face what she'd helped destroy. I felt Emma's hand slip into mine, and when I looked down at her, she was smiling. Not a mean smile or a vengeful smile, just satisfied. Justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, Grandma pulled me aside while Emma talked with Patricia about her performance. There's more I need to tell you, things even Patricia doesn't know yet. What things? Samuel's international accounts aren't just going to you and Emma, they're going to 3 other people in this family, who your parents have hurt over the years, people who've been quietly struggling while Richard and Barbara threw money around like it was endless. Grandma pulled out her phone and showed me a list of names. Your cousin Daniel, who your father refused to help when his business failed because Daniel wouldn't bow and scrape. Your Aunt Helen, who your mother cut off for marrying someone beneath her status. And your second cousin Maria, who asked for help with medical bills and was told to figure it out herself. They're all getting trust funds, enough to change their lives. Samuel wanted his money to help people who actually needed it, not people who wanted it for pools and status symbols. I looked at the names, people I barely knew because my parents had systematically isolated anyone who didn't fit their vision of acceptable family. When are you telling them? This week.
I wanted to wait until the court case was settled. Now that it is, I can start distributing the funds Samuel intended. She smiled. Your parents spent years using money to control people, to make themselves feel important, to buy loyalty and obedience. Now they're going to watch that same money go to everyone they've looked down on, and there's nothing they can do about it. We went to dinner that night, just the three of us, at a small Italian place Emma loved. She was glowing, riding the high of performing in court and watching justice unfold in real time. Over pasta, Grandma told us more about Samuel, about the life he'd lived and the values he'd held. He'd believed in using wealth to lift people up, not to hold them down. He'd believed in second chances, but not third ones. And he'd believed that people eventually showed you who they really were, and when they did, you should believe them. He sounds like he was amazing, Emma said softly. I wish I could have met him. He would have loved you, Grandma said. You have his gift for music and his strength of character. That's why the cello went to you specifically. Samuel wanted it played by someone who would honor it, not someone who would see it as a prop or an investment. He knew your mother would make sure you understood that. Emma turned to me. Did you know about the test and everything? Not until after they sold it. Grandma told me everything the same day I found out what happened. I squeezed her hand. But I think part of me always knew your grandparents were capable of something like this. They've always put themselves first. I just didn't think they'd go this far. What's going to happen to them now? Emma asked. They're going to have to pay back the loans they took out using money they don't have, Grandma explained. They'll probably have to sell their house, their cars, all the luxury items they've accumulated over the years. They'll have to live within their actual means for the first time in decades. And everyone in their social circle is going to know why. The court case is public record. The fraud investigation will be news. There's no hiding from this. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said, Good. Maybe they'll learn something. Maybe, I said, but probably not. People like that rarely do. Then at least they'll stop hurting other people, Emma said firmly. At least there's that. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and family drama. My father's business partners started calling, demanding explanations for why the collateral on their investments had disappeared. My mother's friends began distancing themselves as word spread about the fraud investigation. Caroline's husband filed for divorce, apparently unwilling to be dragged down with her. The pool company sued for breach of contract when the deposit check bounced. Everything my parents had built on Samuel's money was collapsing like a house of cards. Meanwhile, Grandma moved forward with distributing the international accounts. Daniel got $2 million and used it to restart his business, with a focus on ethical practices and fair wages. Aunt Helen got $1.5 million and finally left the job she'd been trapped in for 20 years to pursue her passion for teaching. Maria got $1 million that covered her medical bills and set up her kids' college funds. Each of them called me in tears, unable to believe that after years of being told they didn't deserve help, someone had actually seen their worth. This is what Samuel wanted, Grandma told me during one of our weekly lunches. He wanted his money to change lives in meaningful ways. Your parents used it to buy status and control. But real wealth is measured in the good you can do, not the things you can buy. Emma's trust was set up with $5 million, enough to cover her education through graduate school and give her a foundation to build whatever life she wanted. My trust got $3 million, securing our future and giving me the freedom to grow my business without constantly worrying about money. The remaining international funds went to a music scholarship in Samuel's name, helping young cellists from underprivileged backgrounds get access to instruments and training. Everything had purpose. Everything had meaning. 2 months after the court ruling, I got a call from my mother. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Julia, her voice sounded hollow, defeated. I need to talk to you about something. What is it, Mom? We're losing the house. The bank is foreclosing. Your father's business is bankrupt. We've had to sell everything just to pay attorneys and start paying back the loans. We're moving to a small apartment in Providence, the kind of place we used to drive past and feel superior about. She paused. I need to ask if you can help us.
Just a little bit, enough to keep us afloat until we figure something out. I thought about the trust fund sitting in my account. I thought about Emma's cello and the tears on her face when she'd learned what they'd done. I thought about Daniel and Helen and Maria, people my parents had refused to help when they had the means. And I thought about Samuel, watching from wherever the dead watch from, hoping his family would finally learn something. "No," I said quietly. "Julia, please, we're your parents. We made mistakes, yes, but we're family. You can't just abandon us. You abandoned Emma when you sold her cello. You abandoned every value you claimed to hold when you chose a pool over integrity. You abandoned decency when you lied to banks about money that wasn't yours. And now you want me to bail you out because suddenly family matters?" I kept my voice steady. "The answer is no, Mom. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them." "Your grandmother has poisoned you against us," my mother said bitterly. "She's filled your head with lies about Samuel and that ridiculous trust and—" "Grandma didn't poison me, Mom. You did that all by yourself. Every time you chose Caroline over me, every time you dismissed my accomplishments, every time you made it clear that love in this family was conditional on obedience and usefulness, you taught me exactly what kind of person you were. Samuel just made sure there were consequences for it." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not with anger this time, with relief. I'd finally said what needed to be said. I'd finally drawn the line that should have been drawn years ago. That night, Emma asked if I'd heard from Grandma Barbara. I told her about the call and what I'd said. She listened carefully, then nodded. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I know that was hard." It was, but it was also right. I sat down next to her on the couch. "Your grandmother wants us to feel guilty for not helping them, but we're not responsible for fixing problems they created. We are not obligated to bail them out of consequences they earned." Great Uncle Samuel knew they'd do this, didn't he? He knew they'd come asking for money after losing everything. I think so. I think he knew they'd never really change. They'd just get quieter about who they were until an opportunity came along to be that way again. I pulled Emma close. That's why he set things up the way he did. He wanted to make sure the people who actually deserved help would get it, and the people who'd proven themselves unworthy would face real consequences. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been thinking about something. Next year, when I start high school, I want to volunteer at the community music center downtown, teaching kids who can't afford instruments or lessons, using what Great Uncle Samuel gave me to help other people the way he helped us." I felt tears sting my eyes. This incredible girl who'd been through so much in the past few months was thinking about how to pay forward the gift she'd received. "I think that's perfect, sweetie. I think Samuel would love that. And maybe someday one of those kids will be good enough to audition for the scholarship program, the one Grandma Vivian set up." Emma smiled. "It's like this circle, you know? Great Uncle Samuel helps us, we help other people, they help even more people. The good just keeps spreading." "That's exactly how it should work," I said. "That's what wealth is supposed to do. Not isolate people or make them feel superior, but connect people and create opportunities." 3 months after the court ruling, Grandma hosted a family dinner. Not the whole family, obviously. My parents weren't invited. Caroline wasn't invited, but Daniel, Helen, Maria, and their families came. People I barely knew, but who shared my blood and, I was learning, my values. We gathered around Grandma's dining table and shared stories about Samuel, about our lives, about the ways money had been used to hurt us, and the ways it was now being used to heal us. Daniel talked about his new business, an ethical manufacturing company that paid living wages and prioritized sustainability over profit margins. Helen talked about her new teaching position at an inner-city school where she was finally making a difference. Maria talked about her kids, about how they didn't have to worry anymore about medical bills or college costs, about how they could just be kids. And Emma talked about her music, about the scholarship students she was already helping mentor, about the difference it made to hand a young cellist an instrument and say,
This is yours. Use it well." Grandma raised her glass at the end of the evening. To Samuel, who knew that the best revenge wasn't hurting the people who'd wronged him, but empowering the people they'd overlooked. Who understood that justice isn't about punishment, it's about restoration. Who made sure that even after he was gone, his values would live on through us. We all raised our glasses. To Samuel. 6 months after the court ruling, I finally visited my parents, not to reconcile or apologize or bail them out, but to see with my own eyes what consequences actually looked like. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was nice enough, but a far cry from the mansion they'd left behind. My father answered the door looking 10 years older, wearing clothes that weren't designer labels for the first time in my memory. My mother was in the kitchen, cooking dinner herself instead of having it catered or eating at expensive restaurants. "Julia," my father said, surprise and something like hope crossing his face. "I didn't expect to see you." "I won't stay long. I just wanted to talk to you about something." We sat in their small living room, surrounded by the few possessions they'd been able to keep, family photos that suddenly felt like evidence of a life that had been built on lies. My mother joined us, her face tight with the kind of tension that comes from years of holding up a facade that finally collapsed. "I've been thinking about what happened, about the cello and the trust and everything that came after, and I realized something important. Samuel didn't set up that test to hurt you. He set it up to give you one final chance to be better than you'd been, one last opportunity to choose integrity over greed, family over status, love over money, and you failed." My father looked down at his hands. "We thought we were doing what was best for the family. Caroline's children needed that pool. They'd been asking for—" "Stop," I said firmly. "Don't do that. Don't rewrite history to make yourselves the victims. You sold Emma's cello because Caroline wanted something, and you've never been able to tell her no. You used Samuel's money to fund a lifestyle you couldn't actually afford, and when you got caught, you tried to blame everyone but yourselves. That's not being a victim. That's being exactly who Samuel thought you were." My mother's eyes flashed with the old anger. "So you came here to gloat, to rub our faces in how far we've fallen?" "No, I came to tell you that Emma's performing at Carnegie Hall next month, a youth orchestra showcase for the Samuel Ashford Scholarship recipients. She's playing the cello you sold, the one Samuel entrusted to her, in front of hundreds of people who will know the story of how she almost lost it and how justice brought it back. And I wanted you to know that you're not invited. Not because I'm being cruel, but because you've proven you don't get to be part of the good things anymore. You had your chance to celebrate Emma's achievements, to be the grandparents she deserved, and you chose a pool instead." I stood up. "Emma wanted me to tell you something. She said, 'Tell them I forgive them for what they did, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I'm not letting what they did control my life anymore. I'm choosing to be better than they were, and I'm choosing to use what Great Uncle Samuel gave me to help people instead of hurt them.'" My mother's face crumpled. My father looked away. For the first time, I think they actually understood what they'd lost. Not just money or status or the big house, but the chance to be part of something meaningful. The chance to watch their granddaughter become someone extraordinary. The chance to be remembered for something other than greed and selfishness. The trust Samuel set up wasn't just about money. It was about values, about proving you understood what really mattered. And you proved you didn't. So now Emma and I are going to build a life based on what Samuel taught us. We're going to use wealth to lift people up. We're going to prioritize integrity over appearances. And we're going to remember that family is defined by love and respect, not by blood and obligation. I walked to the door. Before I left, I turned back one more time. If you ever actually change, if you ever truly understand what you did wrong and why it mattered, reach out to Emma. Not to me, not to Grandma, to Emma. Because she's the one you hurt the most, and she's the only one whose forgiveness actually means anything. But don't do it expecting her to fix things for you or bail you out or make you feel better about yourselves. Do it because you genuinely understand you failed her and you want to be better. I didn't wait for a response. I left them there in their small apartment with their regrets and their consequences, and I drove home to Emma and Grandma and the family we were building on Samuel's foundation. The Carnegie Hall performance was everything Emma had dreamed it would be. She wore a simple black dress and carried her cello onto the stage with the confidence of someone who'd been tested and emerged stronger. The audience was full of scholarship students and their families, people who understood what it meant to receive an unexpected gift and use it well. Grandma sat next to me in the front row, tears streaming down her face, watching her great-granddaughter honor Samuel's memory in the most perfect way possible. Emma's solo was flawless. The Dvorak concerto she'd been working on for months played with emotion and technical precision that took my breath away. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause, standing ovation, flowers thrown onto the stage, and through it all, Emma stood there smiling, holding the cello that had almost been taken from her, surrounded by proof that sometimes justice actually wins.
Backstage afterward, Emma was mobbed by younger scholarship students asking questions and seeking advice. She answered each one patiently, encouraging them to practice and dream big, and remember that instruments were meant to be played, not hoarded or sold or treated as investments. I watched her mentor these kids with the same care Samuel had used to mentor his students decades ago, and I realized the legacy wasn't just about money. It was about passing forward the values that money should serve. Grandma pulled me aside while Emma was busy with her admirers. "Samuel would be so proud," she said quietly. "This is exactly what he hoped would happen. The cello being played by someone who loves it, the money helping people who need it, the family values being passed to a new generation that actually understands them. He knew your parents would fail the test, but he also knew you and Emma would pass it. That's why he made sure the path was laid out for you." "Did you know?" I asked. "When you gave Emma the cello all those years ago, did you know what would happen?" "I knew eventually your parents would reveal their true nature. Samuel and I talked about it before he died. He said, 'Give them time and opportunity and they'll show you exactly who they are. And when they do, make sure the consequences are clear and permanent.' So I waited. I gave Emma the cello. I told your parents it was from Samuel's protected collection, and then I watched to see what they'd do." She smiled sadly. "I hoped they'd surprise me, but they didn't. They acted exactly as expected, and now they're living with exactly what they earned." "Do you think they'll ever understand?" "Honestly, I don't know. Some people spend their whole lives blaming everyone else for their problems. But that's not your concern anymore, Julia. You and Emma have your own path now, one built on integrity and generosity and using resources to help people instead of control them. That's the legacy Samuel wanted. That's what you're building." We watched Emma laughing with the scholarship students, her face bright with joy. This incredible girl, who'd been hurt so deeply but had chosen to transform that hurt into something beautiful, who'd taken the gift Samuel left her and was multiplying it, spreading it, making sure it touched as many lives as possible. That was real wealth. That was real success. A year after the court ruling, Caroline reached out. Not to me, but to Emma, exactly as I'd told my parents to do. She sent a letter apologizing for her role in selling the cello, acknowledging that she'd been selfish and greedy and had hurt people she should have protected. She didn't ask for money or favors. She just said she was sorry and that she understood if Emma never forgave her. Emma read the letter 3 times, then asked my advice. "What do you think I should do, Mom?" "I think you should do whatever feels right to you. Forgiveness is personal. You don't owe it to anyone, but you're also allowed to give it if you want to." Emma thought for a long time. Then she sat down and wrote a response. She told Caroline that she appreciated the apology, but that forgiveness would take time and would have to be earned through changed behavior, not just words. She said she was willing to have a relationship with her aunt someday if Caroline could prove she'd actually learned from what happened, but for now, she needed space. It was honest and mature and perfectly Emma. Caroline wrote back thanking her for the chance, even a conditional one.
She didn't push, she didn't make excuses, she just accepted Emma's terms and promised to do better. I didn't know if she'd follow through, but at least she was starting from a place of genuine remorse instead of entitlement. That was something.
My parents never reached out. Not to Emma, not to me, not to Grandma. I heard through family members that they'd both found jobs, my father doing consulting work for a fraction of what he used to make, my mother working retail after years of looking down on people who did. They'd downsized again, moving to an even smaller apartment when they couldn't afford the first one. They were surviving, but barely, and they were doing it without the cushion of Samuel's money or the illusion of being important. Part of me felt sorry for them. They were my parents, after all, and seeing them struggle was hard. But a larger part of me recognized that this was what accountability looked like. They'd made choices, terrible choices, and now they were living with the results. That wasn't cruel. That was just reality catching up with years of behavior that had been shielded by money and privilege. Emma graduated from middle school with honors and multiple scholarship offers for prestigious music programs. She chose one that emphasized both performance and education, wanting to continue developing her skills while learning how to teach and mentor others. Great Uncle Samuel was a teacher, she explained. He didn't just play music, he passed it on. I want to do that too. Grandma threw her a graduation party at her apartment, inviting all the family members who'd been helped by Samuel's legacy. Daniel, Helen, and Maria, and their families, came, along with several of Emma's scholarship students and their parents. It was loud and chaotic and wonderful, full of people who understood that success wasn't about having the biggest house or the fanciest car. It was about building community and supporting each other and using whatever resources you had to make the world a little bit better. During the party, Emma stood up and made a speech. I want to thank Great-Grandma Vivian for teaching me that justice is real and that good people eventually win. I want to thank my mom for always choosing me over people who didn't deserve her loyalty. And I want to thank Great Uncle Samuel, even though I never got to meet him, for setting up a test that revealed the truth and protected people like me. Because of him, I learned that wealth isn't about how much money you have, it's about what you do with it. And I learned that family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up, who cares, and who chooses to be better every single day. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Grandma hugged Emma so tight I thought she might break her. Daniel and Helen and Maria lined up to shake her hand and tell her how much her words meant. And I stood there, watching my daughter, this fierce, brilliant girl who'd been through betrayal and come out stronger, and felt more grateful than I'd ever been for Samuel's foresight and Grandma's patience and the justice that had finally been served. 2 years after the court ruling, I got an email from the buyer who'd originally purchased Emma's cello from my parents. He was organizing a special concert series featuring instruments with remarkable histories, and he wanted Emma to perform and tell the cello's story. She agreed immediately. The concert was held at a beautiful venue in Manhattan, and Emma played Samuel's favorite pieces before sharing the story of how the cello had almost been lost and how it had been saved by a dead man's wisdom and a family's commitment to doing what was right. The audience was captivated. After the concert, dozens of people came up to Emma to tell their own stories of family betrayal, of money being used as a weapon, of feeling powerless against people who seemed untouchable. And Emma listened to each one, offering what comfort and advice she could, reminding them that justice might take time, but it was real, that consequences might be delayed, but they were inevitable, that choosing integrity over convenience was always worth it, even when it was hard. On the drive home that night, Emma said, "Mom, do you think Great Uncle Samuel knew that the cello would become this whole big thing, that his test would matter to so many people?" I think he hoped it would matter to the people he loved. You, me, Grandma, the family members who deserved better. I don't think he knew it would resonate with strangers, but I think he'd be happy about it. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. You're doing exactly what he wanted, Emma. You're using what he gave you to make a difference. That's his real legacy. I'm glad Grandma Barbara and Grandpa Richard sold the cello, Emma said quietly. I mean, I was furious when it happened, and hurt. But if they hadn't done it, we never would have known the truth about the trust. We never would have seen who they really were. And all those people who needed help, Daniel and Helen and Maria and everyone else, they wouldn't have gotten Samuel's money. So in a weird way, them being awful created something good. I thought about that. She was right. My parents' betrayal had triggered a cascade of events that resulted in justice being served and resources being redistributed to people who would actually use them well. Their worst impulses had accidentally created the exact conditions Samuel had hoped for. That's a very mature way to look at it, sweetie. Great Uncle Samuel was smart. He knew that bad people would eventually do bad things, so he made sure that when they did, it would lead to good outcomes for good people. That's like next-level planning. Emma smiled. I want to be like that when I grow up. I want to think ahead and protect people, and make sure that even if bad stuff happens, there's a path forward. You're already like that, I said. You're already Samuel's legacy. 3 years after the court ruling, Grandma Vivian died peacefully in her sleep at age 89. She'd lived long enough to see Emma flourish, to see Samuel's money distributed to people who deserved it, and to see my parents face the consequences of their choices. At her funeral, Emma performed a solo on the cello, a piece Samuel had written himself but never published. The music was beautiful and haunting, full of hope and sorrow, and the kind of wisdom that only comes from truly understanding life. In her will, Grandma left detailed instructions for the continued distribution of Samuel's remaining funds. Scholarships were endowed, music programs were funded. Family members who'd been overlooked for decades suddenly found themselves with resources to pursue dreams they'd long since abandoned. Every single decision was strategic, purposeful, designed to maximize the good that could be done with the wealth Samuel had accumulated and Grandma had protected. To Emma, Grandma left her personal journals, decades of observations about the family, and notes about Samuel's plans. Reading through them, Emma discovered that Grandma had been documenting my parents' behavior for over 20 years, waiting for the moment when they'd cross the line Samuel had drawn. Every slight, every selfish act, every time they'd chosen money over people, Grandma had written it down, not out of bitterness, but out of preparation. She'd known the test was coming, she'd known they'd fail, and she'd made sure there would be a complete record when they did. She was protecting me before I was even born, Emma said, reading through entries from years before her birth. She was setting up dominoes so that when I needed justice, it would already be in place. That's what real love looks like, I said. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but patient preparation. Making sure the people you care about have what they need, even if you're not around to see them use it. Emma added Grandma's journals to the shelf next to Samuel's letters and the legal documents from the trust case, a complete archive of how justice had been served, preserved for future generations who might need proof that standing up to family bullies was possible and worthwhile. 5 years after the court ruling, Emma was accepted to Juilliard with a full scholarship funded by the Samuel Ashford Foundation. She moved to New York City with her cello and her great-uncle's legacy, ready to become the musician he'd hoped she would be. On her first day, she sent me a photo of herself in front of the school, holding the cello, with a caption that made me cry. "Thank you, Great-Uncle Samuel, for believing in people you'd never meet. Thank you, Great-Grandma Vivian, for being patient enough to see justice through. And thank you, Mom, for teaching me that integrity matters more than peace. I'm going to make you all proud." She already had. Every day she chose kindness over cruelty, generosity over selfishness, truth over comfortable lies. She made us proud. She was living proof that Samuel's plan had worked, that good values could be passed down even through betrayal and pain, that justice, though sometimes slow, was real and achievable and worth fighting for. I never spoke to my parents again.
They tried reaching out a few times over the years, usually when they needed something or when family events made my absence conspicuous, but I never responded. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. They'd shown me who they were. Samuel had given them a test, and they'd failed it spectacularly. And I'd learned that protecting yourself and the people you love sometimes meant cutting off access, even to family, even when it hurt. Don't forget to comment and tell me which country or city you're watching from. Your messages always make my day. More amazing stories are coming your way soon. Take care of yourself, stay confident, and keep pushing forward.
She was protecting me before I was even born, Emma said, reading through entries from years before her birth. She was setting up dominoes so that when I needed justice, it would already be in place. That's what real love looks like, I said. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but patient preparation. Making sure the people you care about have what they need, even if you're not around to see them use it. Emma added Grandma's journals to the shelf next to Samuel's letters and the legal documents from the trust case, a complete archive of how justice had been served, preserved for future generations who might need proof that standing up to family bullies was possible and worthwhile. 5 years after the court ruling, Emma was accepted to Juilliard with a full scholarship funded by the Samuel Ashford Foundation. She moved to New York City with her cello and her great-uncle's legacy, ready to become the musician he'd hoped she would be. On her first day, she sent me a photo of herself in front of the school, holding the cello, with a caption that made me cry. "Thank you, Great-Uncle Samuel, for believing in people you'd never meet. Thank you, Great-Grandma Vivian, for being patient enough to see justice through. And thank you, Mom, for teaching me that integrity matters more than peace. I'm going to make you all proud." She already had. Every day she chose kindness over cruelty, generosity over selfishness, truth over comfortable lies. She made us proud. She was living proof that Samuel's plan had worked, that good values could be passed down even through betrayal and pain, that justice, though sometimes slow, was real and achievable and worth fighting for. I never spoke to my parents again. They tried reaching out a few times over the years, usually when they needed something or when family events made my absence conspicuous, but I never responded. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. They'd shown me who they were. Samuel had given them a test, and they'd failed it spectacularly. And I'd learned that protecting yourself and the people you love sometimes meant cutting off access, even to family, even when it hurt. Don't forget to comment and tell me which country or city you're watching from. Your messages always make my day. More amazing stories are coming your way soon. Take care of yourself, stay confident, and keep pushing forward.